Hey everybody, Plushie here, and today's FGO Hot Take is going to be a very special one because it's going to be on the first ever servant every FGO player has, which is of course MASH. And if you haven't been Ordeal Call 4, we're going to go into full-blown territory with this character starting after a couple seconds, so I suggest you leave now if you want to, maintain this surprise for especially, I guess, NA players. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Today's video is of course going to be on MASH Paladin, the latest evolution of MASH. And this, unlike previous MASH forms, truly feels like a full-fledged SSR. Very much one of the most powerful SSRs, in fact, in the entire game. So that's certainly very exciting. And without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on MASH Paladin. So taking a look at her base stats, before we even actually get into her attack and defense, do note that her cost is increased to 16 if she is specifically in this Paladin form, basically symbolizing how she is a proper SSR now. You can still switch her Ascension back into a weaker, older previous form if you want to backline her as a zero-cost unit. With this update, MASH is also able to be grailed all the way up to 120, as well as bonded up to bond 15, so you can get her bond CE, she has one now, as well as increase that bond cap up to 15. So even without actually looking at MASH Paladin, she's going to be one of the best backline bond absorbers in the game, because again, you can switch her back to zero cost form and still bond grill her, because she also usually has passives that will bond boost the entire party. But yeah, let's actually take a look at her base stats as MASH Paladin. So she definitely got a stat boost. Her attack at level 90 with 1k foe is boosted up to 11,835, still relatively low amongst SSRs. She is a very defensive unit, so that kind of makes sense. Her HP is a whopping 16,528 with foes, and that is very bulky, of course. And she is just still, everything else is the same, I believe. The MP gain per hit is a 0.84% per hit on 2-hit quick and 2-hit arts, and she also has a 1-hit buster and 3-hit extra attack, so none of that actually changed. Her internals still remain the same, and she has a lot of interesting traits for bonding. Of course, she is lawful good, there's a CE for that. She is a demi-servant, there's also a CE for that, which of course, including living human, that's the same CE. And of course, she is a costume owning servant, because all of these ascensions actually counts as costumes, including Paladin. So she is also, she can like triple dip on bomb boost CEs. Two more tiny tidbits to take note of. MASH becomes a man attribute servant from an earth attribute servant after changing into Paladin form, and she also loses her Knights of the Round status after entering Paladin form, which, are story related reasons, but notably she does lose her synergy with the post-buff Lancer Artoria, which personally I don't think is a very big deal. Her farming teams usually don't involve Lartoria, but just to be a little bit aware of that, I suppose. Taking a look at her skill set, her first skill is a party-wide 20% defense up, a party-wide 20 MP battery, and a self 30% attack up and crit up also for 3 turns. And this is a 6-turn cooldown skill. So this is essentially an upgraded version of her old skill, but it moved the damage cut to her MP, which we'll see in just a bit. Party-wide 20 MP charge obviously is extremely powerful for both just challenge quests as well as farming, which you'll see later. She has farming utility, which is super cool. The attack up and crit up are only for herself, unfortunately, but she is trying to be a DPS in this Paladin form somewhat, so it does fit, but I guess they don't want to completely invalidate Waver with a single skill, so they didn't make this party-wide. But still, just a super solid skill now. MASH has party charge. What year do we live in, right? The only gripe I have is obviously this being extended to a 6-turn cooldown skill instead of a 5-turn cooldown skill, but I guess it is justified with so many extra effects added. Her second skill is a targetable 1-turn Solemn Defense, as well as a 30 MP battery. So whoever receives the Solemn Defense also gets to 30 MP battery, and the other 2 members that did not get targeted also gets a full turn of Invul, and this is on a 8-turn cooldown. We'll see later how this skill is a lot better than it looks right now, because the 8-turn cooldown is a little bit deceptive, but just looking at the skill effect, it is essentially a better illusion, because it is a party-wide invul, but it can also give one member a super invul essentially, and also a targetable 30 MP battery. So Mash is a 50 MP charger when combining this with her first skill. In fact, she has like Taikobo battery is what I like to call it. She has even better, because it's targetable 50 and the other 2 gets 20 instead of self 50 and the other 2 gets 20. So it's a really good amount of battery charge. So again, if we are forced to use Mash in the future in story, it's not going to be upsetting at all. It's a 50 MP charger. And this skill, of course, super good defensively. You can put the Solemn Defense on Mash and taunt her, which we'll see later. She still has that taunt, so that she can even bypass single target invul piercing MPs, for example. But overall, this is a really solid skill, and it will look a lot better after going through her MP. Mash's third skill is a 1-turn self-taunt, as well as a 1-turn 400% MP generation up. And she also gives herself a 3-turn effect where whenever she takes hits, she will generate 10 stars. This is again on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is a upgraded version of her old taunt skill. She keeps the 1-turn taunt and the ridiculous 400% MP gain boost. It basically guarantees her getting her MP back with a non-crit arts card. It's just a back-to-back MP button, essentially. And now she also has the ability to generate quite a bit of stars, especially during the turn where she taunts herself. She also does need stars, as you'll see in a bit, so this is actually a lot more significant than it might seem at first, but even without context, her first skill already has an attack up and crit up, so this can help her do some crit damage, and also, the taunt synergizes very well with her second skill. This skill didn't actually get that big of a glow up. Especially annoying is that the star generation on defense effect is 3 turns, but the taunt is only 1 turn, so the other 2 turns are not going to be very consistent, but still, it's an upgraded skill to an already really good skill. Take a look at her passives. She still has magic resistance A, which is really good, and writing C, not very important, and of course she has the really good party-wide bond boost effect whenever you are fighting a main story chapter. So this is really good, but not very effective in gameplay at all. But as Paladin, she gains an insane passive, Territory Defense C. She gets 5 hits of a special buff called Territory Defense on the other 2 members of the team, not including herself, where whenever they take any hit that exceeds 1,000 damage, it will be cut down to 1,000 damage. It is essentially technically better Solemn Defense, because nothing pierces it, and you can't remove it because it's a passive. The only thing that can bypass this are passive damages, such as HP drain effects, like on Cernunos, or thought effects, again, like on Cernunos. It's so ridiculous. You can even just keep her in the back line and then swap her up just in case of an emergency, even though she already has like the party invul with her second skill. If there's like an Amakusa MP, let's say, buff removes everything before they do damage, you can still swap on Mash and get her killed, but then your other 2 members would be alive. And one more thing that is ridiculous about this passive is that Mash gives a lot of defense and damage cut. That's all she is about. So if you give your party so much defense up and damage cut that they're taking damage that is less than 1,000 per hit, this is not actually used. You can use Mash MP and her first skill to give the entire party enough defense so they take less than 1,000 damage per hit. Nobody can die when Mash has this passive, except of course Mash herself, but Mash herself is known to be very tanky already, And also, she gained another passive to help with that. She just has permanent 1000 damage cut. Again, might not seem much, but it's a really good combo with a servant that is known for spamming defense ups. So yeah, Mash is one of the most powerful tanks, and these passives just make her even more broken. And finally, Mash's default MP is a party-wide 3-turn damage cut. At MP5 it would be 2000, but currently she's only MP3, so it would be a 1.75 thousand damage cut. It also gives the party 1x 3-turn of debuff immunity, really good, as well as party-wide 30% attack up for 3 turns. And if there's a threat to humanity enemy on the field, she would further buff the party's MP damage by 50% for 3 turns, which is, of course, ridiculous. She would also give herself the Holy Sword charging buff for 3 turns, which changes her defensive MP to an offensive one. And it also reduces her second skill's cooldown by 5 turns. So this is why earlier when I said her second skill might not look as exciting, yes, it is a better illusion and a targetable battery, but 8-turn cooldown is a very long cooldown. Psych, it's actually a 3-turn cooldown skill. How ridiculous is that? And of course, the Holy Sword charging buff lasts for 3 turns, but it counts the turn when she uses her MP. So in reality, every supportive MP would give you 2 extra turns of offensive MP. That's how her tempo works. Because this transformation is actually a buff effect, just like BB Dubai's MP formed switch, this is actually a removable and blockable buff. So do be a little bit wary when fighting against enemies with buff block or buff removal. You might not have the correct MP form ready if they remove this status. And finally, her overcharge effect is a party-wide defense up for 3 turns from 30% all the way scaling to 50%. So it's, again, old Mash's MP with a lot of defense up, now with damage cut as well, and you combine that with her first skill, your entire party basically takes no damage. So even just looking at the defensive MP, it's really broken. Now, the one quote-unquote negative is you can't spam this. You are forced to go into her offensive MP after using this MP. So you can only use this every 3 turns, even if you have her MP up at all times, which might look like a bit of a hindrance if you want to use her as a pure tanker, but because of how much defensive effects we just went through after looking through her entire kit, it is not even an issue at all. Again, her second skill, the party-wide better illusion, can be a 3-turn cooldown skill because of this supportive MP, which is already like better than most other defensive effects in the game. And of course, this MP already gives a lot of defense, 30% defense up and the 1.75 thousand damage cut, and her first skill gives even more defense up. So you're not going to be worrying about tankiness with Mash, even if you can only use this every 3 turns. Speaking of the offensive MP, let's take a look at what it does. So, for 2 turns after her defensive MP, Mash's MP turns into an AoE 5-hit Buster MP that gives her 1 turn of Invo Pierce and Ignore Defense, really good combo, and it deals 200% extra damage to Threat to Humanity enemies, which is in the form of a super effective mod. And it removes all buffs from the enemy afterwards. So even though this is buff removal after damage, she already has Invo Pierce and Ignore Defense, so most of the time it doesn't actually matter because she will be able to pierce the defensive buffs, and then it will remove stuff like Guts or offensive buffs, which doesn't matter if it removes before or after damage. And the overcharge of the MP is a Buster Up for a single turn that of course buffs her before the MP, that scales from 20% to 40%, which is pretty nice. The MP itself is extremely powerful. Full buff removal AoE MP, they don't really make these a lot at all. And, you know, Mash just has that. And on top of that, the Invo Pierce and Ignore Defense before damage is actually better than just buff removal before damage nowadays, because so many defensive buffs are unremovable on boss gimmicks. So this actually covers even more fronts than a character such as Amakusa. And of course, she gotta have that 200% super effective against Threat to Humanity. Very in theme, better than a normal anti-trait. Normal anti-traits are 150%. And you gotta remember, Her first supportive MP that would transform her into this offensive MP also will give her 50% extra MP damage up if there's a threat to humanity enemy on the field. So her MP is giga broken against threat to humanity. Let's take a look at her second skill. So earlier I mentioned you can use her supportive MP to make her second skill effectively 3-turn cooldown, but the second skill only does the party-wide invul thing when she has the Arts MP. When she's in Buster MP mode, it transforms into a completely different skill. So her second skill turns into a 3-turn MP damage up by 100%. Yeah, dude, that's totally fine. That's not broken at all. And it also charges her MP gauge by 4% every star she consumes. And she will consume the stars. She doesn't just count them. It's like Cuckoo. She would actually absorb them. But yeah, this is why stars are so important for her. If she has 25 stars or more, it's a 100 MP battery. This is also why she can participate in Buster farming, because with Koyan Light's second skill's 20 stars, this is an 80 MP battery. And of course, the 100% MP damage up pairs super well with Oberon. You would double this. This would be a 200% MP damage up on the last wave. Her damage is absurd in those kinds of farming comps, which we'll get into in the farming section. And finally, the skill has a very small demerit of self-damage by 2000 without killing herself. But if you're pairing her with Tonalico in multi-core, this is actually an upside, because Tonalico's charisma buffs you more the less HP you have. So there you go. This is Mash's offensive second skill, which is what ties everything together for Mash farming. In terms of farming comps, Mash's farming is going to be very similar to Super Alco in concept, because obviously you would need to take a turn to transform, and someone else would have to clear the wave on that turn. And preferably, again, for the wave 1 clear, you would want someone to self-sacrifice. Habertrot, of course, comes to mind, and she even has the added benefit of generating stars with her MP for Mash to use to charge her second skill after her transformation. Now, I never liked Super Alco farming because you would have to put in too many charge in order to justify it, at least in my opinion, but Mash is different in a couple of ways. Number one, Mash has 50% MP battery, actually more. She has party-wide 20% MP battery and a targetable 30 MP battery. This is a very flexible amount of battery before she even transforms, so she can help herself get her MP, of course, and also help others, while Alco has none of the charge effects in her initial kit before turning into Super Alco. Number 2, Super Alco farming comps has a cost issue. Usually you are using Habertrot on 1, double Castoria, and Oberon as your supports. This is obviously very expensive because compared to a normal looping comp, you're adding a whole ass 4-star into your comp. However, with Mash, you don't actually have to do that. Mash does not use double Koyanskaya of Light in normal circumstances. The reason behind that is that her second skill, which is a 30 MP battery before she transforms, is on an 8-turn cooldown. However, the MP would already reduce that 8 turns by 5 turns down to 3 turns, and then 1 Koyan Light will reduce its cooldown further to 1 cooldown because it reduces by 2, and then finally Mash would naturally take a turn to transform, so after that turn progresses, the cooldown goes down to 0. So Mash can actually use her second skill again, the post-transformation version, which is the big battery and the big MP damage up, with just 1 Koyan Light on turn 2. If you have access to her Append 5, which will further reduce the cooldown by 1 after using it for the first time, she doesn't even need Koyan Light to use that skill in a 3-turn farming comp. Granted, she only gets to use it on turn 3, which is a lot less flexible. And now I'm going to introduce a couple of my personal favorite Mash looping comps. Obviously, I'm not going to include everything possible because Mash is actually very flexible in terms of who she can pick to clear Wave 1 for her. I'm going to mainly focus on comps that are more free-to-play friendly, or at least cost realistic, because yes, you can build Mash just like Super Aoko, and then have a bunch of SSRs on top of the Wave 1 clear just to give MASH the maximum possible damage. However, most of the times you do not have to do that for farming. And finally, all of these comps are going to have no starting charge required. This is another benefit of MASH looping comps. You do not need any starting charge because of the sheer amount of charge MASH can provide. Because if you really think about it, she has a targetable 30 MP battery, a party 20 MP battery, and a self 100 MP battery after she transforms. So she really doesn't need any starting charge CE. And I'm also going to be comparing her damage to some of the rare Buster Loopers that can do no starting charge CE, because I think that's the only fair group of servants to compare them with. The other ones, such as Cuckoo or Arjuna Alter, they can only use 50 MP starting charge CEs, which is a significant restriction compared to MASH. These servants would be Tonalico, Melusine, and Arcuade, and I'm going to assume all of them are hitting neutral class, and also all of them are MP5. So yes, this is the caliber we're dealing with. MASH at MP3 is very competitive against MP5 premium Buster Loopers. The first team I'm going to introduce is, in my opinion, the most standard MASH farming comp that you will probably be using the most. This comp includes MASH, Habetrot, Koyan Light, and Oberon in the backline, as well as any Mystic Code that has more than 10% MP charge. This comp also requires both MASH and Habetrot to have a maxed out Append 2 skill. On turn 1, you would only use MASH's second skill on herself and hold her first skill, while also using Koyan Light's battery on MASH. Habetrot will be able to fully charge herself as well as use her skill 3, so you MP with both MASH and Habetrot would self-sacrifice. Oberon comes in. On the second turn, because of Habetrot's MP effect, you have more than enough stars to let MASH's second skill be 100% MP charge, so MASH would just use her second skill and then MP. Of course, remember to buff MASH with Koyan Light's Buster Up. And finally, on the third turn, you have all of Oberon's skills still unused, so you use all of it on MASH, giving her 70 charge, and then use MASH's first skill, giving her 20 more charge, so she's at 90, and then finally use the Mystic Code's 10 MP charge to fill MASH to full, and then MASH can MP. So this comp is, again, really convenient. There's no plug suit involved, and you don't need any starting charge. This, compared to some of the most premium Buster Loopers that do not need starting charge, the damage actually looks pretty decent in comparison. Wave 1s are obviously going to be the biggest weakness of this comp, so depends on the situation. I'll introduce a couple of different comps if you need more damage on Wave 1, but looking at Wave 2, MASH's damage is basically equal to Melusine and Arcuade, loses to Tonalico by a bit, but on Wave 3, MASH's damage is also just extremely close to all three of them, only losing to Melusine by a decent bit, but still matching both Arcuade and Tonalico. So it's really good for a almost free comp. You only need one SSR that actually needs to gacha for. And all of these are MP5 copies of these SSRs, of course, so MASH is extremely competitive in the damage front. The second comp I want to introduce is specifically for farming nodes that have one big HP target on turn 1, and this time, instead of bringing Habetrot, you can bring Sojiro, who's of course a single target berserker that's gonna do way better damage than Habetrot to a single target. This comp works a little bit different though, so let's get into it. This comp includes MASH, Sojiro, Oberon in the front line this time, and Koyan Light in the back line. Yet again, you would need a Mystic Code that has 10% MP charge, and also preferably one that has a Star Bomb effect as well, just to make sure MASH has enough stars to make her second skill a 100 MP battery. So on turn 1, you would actually use all of MASH's skills, targeting her second skill on herself as well, and you would also use Oberon's skill 1, and you would use the Mystic Code's 10% battery on MASH as well. All of that combines to a total of 100 MP charge. Sojiro, combining MASH's skill 1 and Oberon's skill 1, would also be at 50% MP because he also has that Append 2. Use his own battery to double that and make it 100. And of course, you would MP with both MASH and Sojiro would self-sacrifice for Koyan Light to come up. On the second turn, you don't actually use Mash's second skill, just use Koyan Light's battery and Oberon's 50 MP battery on Mash, as well as of course Koyan Light's Buster Up, and you would MP with Mash again. And finally, on the third wave, you would use the Star Bomb on Koyan Light as well as the Star Bomb on your Mystic Code to make sure Mash has enough stars to charge to 100 with her skill 2, and of course, throw on all the buffs and then MP with Mash. So with this comp, because you are not using your skill 2 on turn 2, your turn 2 damage actually does fall off quite a bit. It is significantly less when compared to Melusine Arc and Tonelico, but of course, the wave 1 damage is extremely impressive because it is a single target Buster Berserker. On the third wave, you also still have very respectable damage, of course. The final comp I'm going to go in depth into is the most expensive comp because I am including Merlin on top of Oberon and Koyan Light into the comp. This is for specifically if there are assassins on the first wave and you can't deal with them with Habetrot, and instead you would need Arash. This is also the most team cost heavy comp because obviously I'm including 4 5-stars and a 1-star instead of 3 5-star and a 4-star, but this is, the best, at least in my opinion, way to go about it. So this comp includes Mash, Arash, Merlin, Oberon on the leftmost position of the backline, and then finally Koyan Light, and this time we would be needing the Plug Suit. You would also need both Mash and Arash's Append 2 at level 10. So on turn 1, you would use all of Mash's skills, and of course targeting her second skill to herself, and you would also use Arash's battery. Both of them would be at 70 MP charge. This is where Merlin comes in. Merlin has party-wide 30% MP charge, so he can charge both Arash and Mash to 100. Now, it doesn't actually have to be Merlin here. Anyone that has the ability to charge 2 targets by 30% MP each can be here. So 30% party-wide chargers like Koyan Dark and Castoria obviously works. Tez also work if you want. And also characters like Rhaenys, who doesn't have party-wide 30 MP charge, but has the ability to charge 2 targets by 30 MP, also works here. So you actually have a lot of options here. It doesn't have to be Merlin. Merlin just gives Mash the most amount of damage possible because of hero creation. And finally, you would MP with both Mash and Arash. On the second turn, Oberon would come in and you would swap out Merlin for Koyan Light. Now here, there are 2 things you can do. Number 1 is use both Oberon's batteries and Koyan Light's battery on Mash, because technically Mash's second skill on the third turn is a 100 MP battery, so you don't need Oberon's skill 1 for extra charge. However, if you're really scared that Mash maybe didn't overkill enough to make 5 stars on the second wave, you can save Oberon's skill 1 just in case she gets like 90-something% charge from her skill 2 instead of 100. But anyways, of course, you would MP with Mash, and then finally on the third wave, you would use her own battery, charge to 100, and then, throw on all the buffs, and then she would MP. Taking a look at the damage comparisons, this is by far Mash's most damaging comp out of the 3 because of course you're buffing her with an extra Merlin. Wave 1 damage is Arash. You can't really ask for too much. It would be about on the same level as Habetrot because he is just a 1-star. But wave 2 damage, Mash is already very respectable, only losing to Tonelico and beating both Melusine and Arcoade. And finally, on the third wave, Mash hits it out of the park with a whopping 485,000 damage, completely destroying all 3 of her competitions here. So yeah, really shows how much damage Mash can do if you give her just the adequate amount of buffs. These are of course not the only viable comps you can use with Mash. These are just the ones that include more free-to-play options. If you want to pick a premium SSR for the wave 1 damage clearing job, you obviously can. Any SSR that has a decent amount of self battery and a little bit of party-wide MP battery can work with Paladin Mash. So for AoEs, there are obviously a lot of options. Characters like Lohi and Arcoade work extremely well with Paladin Mash. As for single targets, it's a little bit rougher because there aren't that many single targets that also have party-wide MP charges, but the 2 that I can think of that are really good are Tutankhamun and Phantasmoon. So those, if you have I highly recommend pairing them with Paladin Mash as well. One little tidbit in terms of team building with Mash in a farming comp is that if you were to include one damage bonus CE or just Black Grail or Cranking in general, I suggest putting it on the Wave 1 damage dealer instead of Mash, because Mash doesn't have a damage problem 99% of the time. The times when you're going to have a damage problem is the Wave 1 damage dealer not clearing the wave. So, for example, if you were to include one Black Grail and 5 bonus CEs, for like event drops or bond in your comp, I'm putting it on Habertrot instead of Mash, just for more consistent damage. Let's talk a little bit more about Mash's skill 2 cooldown, but this time assuming you have her Append 5 unlocked. So you would use her skill 2 on turn 1, but the cooldown would go down to 7 instead of 8 because of the effect of Append 5. And then you would use her MP to reduce it by 5 down to 2. And after 2 turns of natural turn progression, she can use it again on turn 3. So technically she doesn't need any form of cooldown reduction in order to reuse her skill 2. This actually makes her a really good multi-core farmer. Now I know technically the comps that I brought up earlier are also multi-core because I'm using both Mash and another DPS to clear the wave, but what I mean by this is that even without the specific combo with Koyan Light, Mash can still be a really good multi-core farmer on her own. She of course has a lot of good partners in multi-core as well. The traditionally good multi-core farmers like Tonalico, Arc, and Lohi are really good with her, especially Arc and Phantasmoon, because Arc and Phantasmoon can also charge Living Human, which Mash is a member of. So you get even more charge on Mash if you pair her with specifically Arc and Phantasmoon. The one thing you have to worry about are just these multi-core farmers' ability to generate stars, because Mash needs at least 25 stars in order to have her second skill battery be 100%. So units like Tonalico and Phantasmoon are particularly preferred because they also have star per turn effects. You can even run double Mash comps in certain situations because Mash would charge each other and then they can buff each other. I've demonstrated a lot of these fun comps in my videos, so I'm not going to go too in-depth into them, but yeah, just know that Mash is super flexible in terms of farming, but you need to be a little bit creative in terms of team building, which is, part of the fun, I suppose. In terms of Challenge Quest performance, Mash is absolutely stellar. She's both a wonderful tank as well as a really good DPS. Her supportive MP is one of the most stacked out there. It has party-wide attack up, defense up, damage cut, and even a one-time 3-turn debuff immunity. And of course, the previous effects all last for 3 turns. Her offensive MP is also extremely powerful. It pierces both forms of defense and it removes all buffs from enemies. And it just hits decently hard, especially against Threat to Humanity enemies. This MP is one of the most powerful nukes in the game, outdamaging most single targets even. So yeah, both forms of Mash is really strong, but you're fitting both forms into one unit instead of choosing one or the other. Is it gonna be awkward having to switch between the 2 forms? From my testing, not really. Mostly because both forms are so overwhelmingly powerful that the potential awkwardness feels very worth it to overcome. And there are a lot of ways to actually overcome that awkwardness. The number one most awkward thing that I find personally when using Mash as a DPS, especially when she's the only DPS on your team, is that I feel like she's not really doing her offensive MP enough. And there's actually a very simple fix to that, which is just be smart with your third skill. The most ideal timing to use her third skill, at least in my opinion, is on the first turn after she transforms. You would use her second skill to charge your MP to full and then use your MP. But at the same time, you would have your skill 3 active. Her skill 3, as a reminder, is a taunt, a 1-turn 400% MP gain boost, and she gains stars whenever she takes hits. So you can easily get your MP back even without the help of crits. With just one non-crit arts card, she can gain like 50 to 60 or even 70% MP back, depending on who you pair her with. So it is a very strong tool that almost guarantees you to back-to-back MP as long as you have an MP generating card. So if you do that on the first turn of transformation, on the second turn you would get to MP again, and the enemy would be hitting MASH and generating stars for you to potentially even do a MP Brave Chain crit turn, which is going to be a lot of damage. Of course, you can also use the taunt skill on the turn you transform so that you immediately get your MP back, and then you can MP without the help of her second skill's battery, and then on the turn after that, you use the battery to charge the full. It obviously depends on your card RNG, because you don't always get your arts card on the correct turn, and also it depends on your skill 2's cooldown. So if you just use your skill 2 before your transformation, you're not going to be getting it back immediately after you transform, because it only reduces its cooldown by 5. So if its cooldown is at 7 or above after you use it, you're still going to have to wait an extra turn. So if that's the case, use the skill 3 while you transform. And if you already have it at like cooldown 6 or below, meaning that after your defensive MP, it's going to immediately be available, then you can save it and use it on the first turn of your transformation. The second biggest awkwardness of MASH that people love to bring up is actually the opposite side of the coin, which is, what if I want to use MASH as a pure support and I don't care about her DPS? It's a bit annoying, isn't it, that I cannot spam her arts version's MP? Well, after testing, I don't think that is a problem at all, and the main reason lies in her second skill. So as a reminder, her second skill is a 8-turn cooldown skill that is a better illusion, because it gives one target solemn defense and the other 2 invul, and it also gives the target 30% MP battery. But despite on face value its 8-turn cooldown, it is actually way shorter, because MASH's supportive MP can reduce its cooldown by 5, so in reality it's more like a 3-turn cooldown skill. So you can absolutely just use MASH's MP every 3 turns and never use this skill 2 to charge her Buster MP, and only use it when she goes back into arts mode. I think using a supportive MP every 3 turns is not that bad. Once again, look at the quote-unquote immortal teams that Castoria used to run. She only uses her MP every 3 turns and nobody ever complained. And with this, MASH's second skill would consistently be a 3-turn cooldown party-wide invul that is slightly better than an actual party-wide invul, and during the downtimes, her first skill and her MP combined would still allow your party to basically take no damage. So if you want to use MASH as a pure tank, it's even simpler than trying to use her as a pure DPS. Just don't use her skill 2 while she's in her Buster form. In fact, you can still use her Buster MP even if you're using her as a pure support, because it is still an AoE full buff removal, and having instant access to that effect is really strong. And if you're worried that you might not get your MP back for your supportive MP, you still have MASH's skill 3 to basically guarantee a back-to-back MP turn. So MASH is completely fine even if you just want to use her as a pure tank. Of course, all of this is based around the premise that you want to absolutely maximize your damage while only using MASH as your DPS on your team, which I would have to say is not the best idea ever. If you're only using MASH as the sole DPS on your team, you're probably trying to build a stall team that has the ability to do high burst damage. These teams do exist before. They're known as immortal teams. Teams such as Himiko, Merlin, Castoria has been really popular, and even today some people like using them against difficult bosses. And I can guarantee you MASH is like a way superior version of that kind of team, because her MP actually does damage, and it does a lot of damage. The most comparable comp to the MASH like stall team in general is probably Morgan, Merlin, Castoria, which is still a very good team, but MASH has even better flexibility in team build in my opinion, because despite Castoria being the absolute nuts, sometimes you might feel like you don't even need Castoria, because MASH already gives your party so much defense, and combo that with Merlin, your party is going to have party-wide invul for a very high frequency of the turns, and when you don't have that invul, you still have Mash's defense up and damage cut. So you can afford to run more offensive supports such as Constantine, who's also a tank but also buffs Buster MP damage a lot better than Castoria, or even characters such as Koyan Light, who traditionally is not very good in slow teams, but it's just because she can't give the party any heals or survival. With both Mash and Merlin on the team, you don't really need a third servant to do that. And with those out of the way, Koyan Light is actually a really good slow play support because her MP drains all enemies and charges the entire party. You can basically use her as an actual Buster Tamamo that controls enemies' MP turns as well as help your party spam their MP. Her skill set, of course, synergizes very well with Mash, and Koyan Light can even serve as a sub DPS on your team because remember, Mash's supportive MP buffs the entire party's attack up, and Merlin's skill 1 also buffs the entire party's attack up. So if you don't have a second damaging MP on the team, sometimes these attack ups feels very wasted, like you're never gonna take advantage of the full 3 turns if Mash is the only one that can do AoE MP damage. But having someone like Koyan Light can help you chip away against the enemy even when Mash is not in Buster mode. This will really fill in the gaps while you are charging up Mash for her Buster MP, and this is why I love damaging MP units that has party support utility to pair with the new Mash and Merlin. Characters such as Tonalico and Super Aoko are also great picks outside of Koyan Light. All of that previous talk are just the ways to absolutely optimize Mash if you already have a high-end account. In reality, Paladin Mash fits into basically every team, and she would immediately make every team better. She's more of a Castoria rather than a character that needs to be carried. If you love running free-to-play comps, Mash Paladin is a godsend, but maybe she's actually a curse because free-to-play comps will no longer feel impressive anymore. Supports like Hans are really strong, but their biggest problem is their frailty because they have bronze stats. Well, guess what? They're not frail anymore because Mash is here to protect them forever. Berserkers in general pair very well with Mash because Mash's passive doesn't care that Berserker takes double damage. It would still cut the damage that they take to 1000 for multiple hits. Of course, everything else, you know, the hard defense, the taunt, the damage cut, the defense up, that also all helps Berserkers live a heck of a lot longer. Mash is also a really good backline to bring because once again, her passive can guarantee 2 of your other units living, even if you're up against devastating MPs like Amakusa's MP that will remove every buff and then deal damage. Mash would still protect your other 2 units, even though she has to sacrifice herself. Mash is also just a great soloer if she's the last one standing, because Mash, again, using her second skill only in her defensive mode, means that she has solemn defense every 3 turns. So every 3 turns she's taking no damage, and for the other 2 turns she has the defense up and the damage cut, so she's taking like a couple hundred damage. So she just doesn't die if you give her any form of heal command code. CEs like Iron Will Training and Holy Shroud of Magdalene, specifically against males, can make Mash basically invincible 100% of the time. And the best part about this is that Mash solos aren't even that slow because she has an offensive Buster MP that she can at the very least use every 3 to 4 turns, and she can still back-to-back it with the help of her skill 3, and if the enemy has high enough hit counts, or if you just get a lucky crit with a Mighty Chain, you might not even need her skill 3 to back-to-back MP during her Buster mode turns. So Mash basically fills every possible role that you can want in a challenge quest team, and she's good at every single one of them. In my opinion, if your goal is just beating a boss and you're going in blind, you would always bring Mash Paladin in your team, at the very least in your backline. Quite ironic how Force Mash is such a hated thing in the game that it became a meme, but now you might bring Mash to every fight even when the story doesn't force you to. In conclusion, MASH Paladin is one of the most powerful SSRs ever released into the game, and also one of the most versatile SSRs ever released into the game. And I am very glad that absolutely everybody has access to this servant. As a farmer, MASH Paladin offers a very budget-friendly farming team that, at least for the second and the third wave, can compete against premium Buster Loopers at MP5. All you have to do is solve the wave 1 damage problem, and there are a couple of budget options for that. She can also just act as a really good multi-core farmer because of her party charge and her targetable charge, and her 100% MP battery that doesn't even need any form of additional cooldown reduction to use in 3-turn farming. As a challenge quest unit, she's literally perfect. I think she is as close to an auto-include into every team as possible. She only probably loses to Castoria in terms of occupying that kind of role, right? She is perfect in every form of game plan other than fast play. I'll give you that. She can't really help the party, like hyper offense and then kill the enemy as fast as possible. And as a DPS, if you need to MP with her more than 2 times, then it's kind of difficult for her to do that as well. But other than that, if you only want to win, MASH is going to be just one of the best units in the entire game. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. This has been a long one, and I have really procrastinated on this. I didn't expect this to be this long, but because of real life circumstances and me constantly fixing the script, it ended up being this long. But at the very least, this doesn't have a time frame issue because everybody's eventually going to get this smash. And also, I don't have to recommend you to roll or not because, again, she's free. But yeah, there you go. I will try to follow this up with the Lilith hot take as fast as possible because I think Lilith is a very straightforward servant that doesn't need that much explanation in terms of how to use her, especially after I've already made the video talking about her damage and comparing her to Kintoki. There's just not that much to talk about. So hopefully I don't eat my words and then make another 30-minute Lilith review. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.